Three-bedroom house for rent. Perfect for families. Large backyard, perfect for children. The right house at the right price for the right family. These are the words that drew the LaChance family to an old house in the small town of Union, Missouri. They thought they'd found the perfect home, but they would soon find it was anything but perfect. The viewing was peculiar, to say the least. The first thing they noticed was that the house was abnormally cold. The landlord said it was because the house had good insulation, so it stayed cool even during the summer. He then asked the father, Stephen, if he believed in ghosts, but quickly followed up by saying he didn't believe this house was haunted. He was also very adamant about leaving the house before dark. Strange, but the landlord was a bit eccentric, and the family was desperate to find a home. So they dismissed his odd behavior and agreed to move in. At first, everything seemed normal, with activity limited to things that were easily explained away. Hearing what sounded like boxes falling over seemed ordinary. They were moving, so boxes falling over was a common occurrence. Or a picture repeatedly falling off the wall. Maybe the frame was too heavy, or maybe the house wasn't level. Not uncommon for a house as old as this one. Or the odd behavior of the other people in the neighborhood, who would go out of their way to cross the street to avoid walking in front of the house. Who knows, maybe they were just leery of the new neighbors. One thing they did find odd was that all the interior doors of the house had latches on the outside of the rooms, as though they were meant to keep someone, or something, locked in the rooms, rather than to keep someone out. Then again, the house was built in the 1930s, and many people had lived there over the years. Whoever put the latches on surely had a logical reason for doing so. Something else the family noticed was that every time they left the house, they would return to find every light in the house turned on. At first, Stephen blamed the kids, thinking they were being forgetful and leaving the lights on by accident. So he made a habit of checking all the lights in the house before they left. To his surprise, when they returned, every light was once again turned on. Then he began to suspect that someone had been in the house while they were out, but couldn't find any evidence of anyone having been there. Nothing was broken or stolen, so if someone had been in the house, all they had done was turn all the lights on. He then contacted the landlord, thinking he'd been in the house to inspect or repair something. The landlord denied being in the house and said he wouldn't come to the house without notifying the family ahead of time. Being a skeptic, Stephen then dismissed the lights as an electrical issue. After all, it wasn't uncommon for older houses to have electrical problems, especially if the wiring was done by one of the former occupants rather than a professional electrician. One night shortly after the move, Stephen's daughter came into his room, claiming her closet door kept opening on its own. Stephen dismissed this as the house being old and made a mental note to fix the door. That same night, Stephen would again be awakened, but this time by noise in his own room. As he looked around, he saw the figure of an old man standing in the corner. The figure quickly vanished, and Stephen dismissed it, thinking it must have been a dream. The next day, while working in the yard, Stephen sent his youngest son, Matthew, to the basement to retrieve a garden hose so that they could water the yard. A few minutes later, Matthew screamed, and Stephen rushed into the house to find his son terrified of the basement, claiming he had been chased up the stairs by a monster. Stephen searched the house, but couldn't find anything. Later that same day, Matthew would again come screaming through the house, saying the same monster had tried to chase him down the stairs from the second floor. Stephen again searched the house, and again didn't find anything, so he dismissed the monster as his son's overactive imagination. Later, Stephen experienced what he describes as an electrical sensation that made the hair on his neck and arms stand up. Ever the skeptic, Stephen assumed it was yet another electrical problem with the house. He called his father, who was a handyman, to come check the wiring. His father found nothing out of the ordinary, but he did experience the same electrical sensation Stephen had felt. He said it wasn't like any electric shock he'd ever felt before, and he would later tell Stephen that he thought the house was haunted. A few nights later, the family was playing a game in the living room, when Stephen saw what he describes as a shadow figure out of the corner of his eye. At first, he didn't think anything of it, but when he looked directly at the figure, it began walking towards him. It vanished before anyone else saw it, but left Stephen feeling very uneasy. He decided maybe they needed to get out of the house for a while so he could clear his head. But before they could even get to the door, the family was chased out of the house by an unknown entity after hearing what they described as a loud, tortured scream, like someone screaming in pain. It was so loud that all the dogs in the neighborhood began to bark. As the family ran from the house, they looked back to see a shadow figure watching them from the window. When they eventually returned to the house, everything seemed like it was back to normal. They began to relax when all of a sudden every door in the house slammed shut. The electrical sensation returned, and Stephen noticed a foul odor which he describes as rotting meat. Then the horrifying scream started again, and the family was once again chased from the house by something they could not see. They would only return to the house to pack their belongings, but would never spend another night in the house. Future residents of the house would report similar experiences, as well as a possible demonic possession. The history of the land surrounding the house may give some clue as to what haunts the home. During the Civil War, the land was owned by a man named John Crow. He was a captain in the Union Army and was rumored to bring captured Confederate soldiers back to the town of Union to be executed. During this same time, on a nearby hill where a retirement home now sits, was a Civil War infirmary. Many soldiers likely died here as a result of their wounds. Then, after the war, the site became the county poorhouse. It is rumored that many who died here, often from tuberculosis, were buried in unmarked graves in the surrounding landscape, essentially making much of the area into mass grave sites. One of these mass graves is rumored to be very close to the Union House. Could the entity that haunts the house be the spirit of an angry soldier who was killed or buried near the house? Or could it be the spirit of someone from the poorhouse who died of a terrible disease? Or maybe the house is not home to one spirit, but several, as the restless souls buried in some of the mass graves struggle to find peace. We may never truly know, but to those who have lived in the Union House, there is no doubt that something otherworldly calls the house home, and it doesn't take kindly to visitors. To learn more about the Union House and the experiences of the LaChance family, we invite you to check out the book The Uninvited, The True Story of the Union Screaming House by Stephen LaChance.